That's anxious. That sound that you make on the 10th step of a flight of stairs when your heart beats fast and you run low on oxygen. The people who are out of breath are out of breath because of the angst of life. Now, Susan and I not long ago got to go to the state of Hawaii, the island of Kauai, where there is not a whole lot of angst. But if you hike up the volcanoes and mountains, there is a lot of shish. But the Hawaiians have a word for non-Hawaiian white people. They're not racist. They just have a word for us. I don't know how to say it correctly. It's haole. Haole? Oh, you know this word. You be one. No. Okay. Haole. So those of you that are here and you're white and you're not from Hawaii, you're a bunch of haoles. And they call you that, and that word means no breath. And they got it a long time ago because when the settlers came in, they were they're always in a hurry. They're building plantations, they're building harbors, they're building ranches. The settlers seemed to the Hawaiians to always be short of breath, no breath. Do you realize many of us live life that way all the time? Anxiety takes away our breath. It would be easier to deal with if that's all it did. But it also will take away your sleep, right? It'll take away and sap your energy. It'll take away your sense of well-being. Being anxious can really do a number on you. But I'm so glad we have Psalm 37:8 that talks to us a little bit about this. It says, cease from anger, forsake wrath, do not fret. It only does what? It only causes harm. So if you're a person that is in the habit of fretting, one of the goals of this sermon is to, first of all, minister a gentle message to you. Stop it! But even more importantly, begin to address how. Because some of you, as soon as you say, stop fretting, you're like, I really want to. But how? I don't know how to. I can't seem to do it. That's because anxiety twists us up into emotional pretzels. I have another book here. I like it. It's called A More Excellent Way to Be in Health by Henry W. Wright. It took me a long time to read this book. It's like a textbook. But he has some godly ways of addressing illnesses. But what I'm amazed is how many illnesses are caused or made worse by anxiety. You realize there are many, many, many illnesses that are brought on because people are anxious. Because anxiety is not fun. In fact, let's talk about the effect of anxiety on our community. Anxiety disorders are reaching epidemic proportions. How many of you would agree? I've got some stats here for you. In a given year, nearly 50 million Americans will feel the effects of a panic attack, phobias, or other anxiety disorders. Anxiety disorders in the U.S. are the number one mental health problem among women and are second only to alcohol and drug abuse among men. How many of you see that? Stats are stats, but when you can see that stat is true, that's different. The United States, is now the most anxious nation in the world. Good for us. People of each generation in the 20th century were 3 times more likely to experience depression than people in the preceding generation. That's from a book called Soul Keeping by John Ortberg. But I'm wondering, how can that possibly be? Don't we have safer cars now? Isn't our water and our electricity regulated? Aren't we well taken care of as a society? Well, I think our government would like to tell us that we are. And yet, anxiety grows. Something about the way we live our lives is making us less calm and less composed. Those that are college kids, they're feeling it too. There was a survey done of 200,000 incoming college freshmen. Students reported an all-time low in overall mental health and environmental stability. It's one of the reasons, let me put a plug in for Chi Alpha, for Tyler and Kimmy and your team. One of the reasons why you need to spend all that money and all that time, the very first week of college, is because so many of those college freshmen are lost. And they're feeling all of this anxiety. And they need to see hope, and they need to see light, and they need to meet some people that are calm and composed. And Kimmy, I haven't met a more calm and composed person than your husband, Tyler. He eats and breathes calm and composed. Someday when I grow, same level of anxiety as the average psychiatric patient in the 1950s. Think about that for a moment. Our kids are not growing up in the same world you and I did. It's a different world out there for them. We're tense. Why? What is the cause of our anxiety? Probably everything I just told you in the last 3 minutes might be some of the cause, but how about change? Is there a lot of change going on in our world? Absolutely. Environment, social order, technology, internet, global warming, nuclear war, terrorist attacks, smartphones, TVs, computer screens. We've barely processed one crisis, and lo and behold, guess what? There's another one. How about travel? We travel what? Just like that. We can get on a plane and be thousands of miles away. You can be in Hawaii in what, 6 hours? Just like that. Travel. Personal challenges, especially during the global pandemic. People dealing with foreclosure, or cancer, or divorce, or addiction. Bankruptcy, going broke, going out of business, all those things. Losing their homes. How about those of us that feel the effects of getting older? Anybody here feel that? Why, I even heard from some people that when you're 58, you dare not roller skate anymore. For fear you may break your elbow. We're getting older. Been roller skating all my life, fallen plenty of times. Have never ever broken something doing that. Now I'm 58, that happens. So, what about Christians? Shouldn't we be way better off than all these statistics? I think we should. But are we? Not so much. We're not exempt from worry. We're not exempt from anxiety. In fact, you and I have been taught that the Christian life is a life of peace. And actually, during this series, I'm going to be teaching you that. But when we don't have peace, then we often assume, and the devil helps us with this, we assume that the problem lies with us. I'm not at peace, and it's my fault. So then, not only do we feel anxious, but because we're Christians, we also feel guilty because we're anxious. How many know that's twice as bad? I'm not only anxious, I'm guilty about it. And then you get into a downward spiral of worry, guilt, anxiety, shame. And as Christians, we can get ourselves in trouble. Well, into the midst of all of this chaos and anxiety, the Apostle Paul has a nice little verse in Philippians chapter 4, verse 6. Let's see what he says. Be anxious for what? Nothing. But in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Be anxious for nothing. Now, I'm looking at this, and does Paul really mean it? I mean, if you're facing foreclosure, be anxious for nothing? You're dealing up with a busted up arm, be anxious for nothing? Does he really mean it? We're going to find that he does. But here's what he's saying. this verse is written in what is in Greek, and you don't really care about this, except for what it means. It's written in what we call the present active tense. What that means is it's an ongoing state. So what Paul is talking about is a perpetual and an ongoing anxiety. So what he's saying when he says be anxious for nothing, he's saying to us, don't let anything in life leave you perpetually breathless and in angst and anxious. Are you understanding the difference? Because let's face it, all of us face anxiety sometimes. Every single person does. The presence of anxiety, that's unavoidable. But the prison of anxiety, that's optional. You don't have to live there. Amen? Because of Jesus, we do not have to live in a prison of anxiety. Anxiety itself is actually not a sin. It's an emotion that we have. But if we're not careful, you know what anxiety can do? It can lead us into sinful behavior. Why? It's how people deal with their anxiety that leads them down into trouble. They do all those things, Daniel, and lots of others that gets us in trouble. And Jesus warned us about this in Luke chapter 21, verse 34. He said, but take heed to yourselves, lest your hearts be weighed down with carousing, drunkenness, and cares of this life, and that day come on you unexpectedly. What was Jesus saying? He's saying, be careful, or your hearts will be weighted down with the anxieties of life. Have you ever been there? Nobody? I have. I have. Just a little while ago, I was really tempted to go down that road. Susan and I, we went to Hawaii. It was so great. Except there was one day, Susan, we ended up spending $1,000 we did not plan on spending. You remember that day? We're getting ready to get on the airplane to fly from the island of Kauai to the island of Maui. Cheryl, that's not a long trip. They're announcing it. People are getting on the plane, and I'm listening to the announcer, and I said, honey, I think we're in trouble. She said, what? I said, from what I'm hearing, these people expect that we've had a COVID test within the 3 days, within the week that we've been on this island. They're not going to count the one that we had in the States in Montana before we came here. She said, that doesn't make any sense. That's ridiculous. I said, I agree. But it sounds like that. So I went up and I said to the guy, is this what you're saying? He says, yep. So we don't have one. And we're getting on the plane. He goes, you shouldn't. Why? Because when you get there, they'll quarantine you and you won't make it to your Convoy of Hope event. That's crazy. All right, give us a COVID test. There isn't one here. Same day. You can't do it. What are we going to do? You need to fly to Oahu, to Honolulu, get your COVID test there, and then fly from Oahu back over to Maui. So, $1,000, 4 plane tickets, and 2 COVID tests later, we end up in Maui. Now, it was great, wasn't it, Susan? But were we prepared for that $1,000 cost? No. Before we had left, my van had been acting up. So when we got home, I had to take it to the shop, and suddenly I had oil leaks and coolant leaks to the tune of another $1,000+ plus. And then my neighbor gently said, hey, I think your air conditioner's going out. And it died the next day. And then when we had that looked over, they came and said, your heater, which we've nicknamed Methuselah because it's so old, Methuselah finally was dying too. They're like, you need to replace this. So when we put that all together, we're like, oh, we just need $10,000. How many know anxiety happens? Ah! And if you're not careful, stuff like this happens, and the devil will use those things to send you down an anxious road. I'm not immune to it either. We had to pray through that. Lord, how are we going to deal with this? We don't know how to deal with this, but we definitely don't want to be anxious about it. We don't want to be worried about it. Life is not fair. No. Be careful, or your hearts will be weighted